Welcome back. First, let me start off by thanking everyone for subscribing and commenting. It's been great for the past few weeks. It's been great all year, but especially in the last few weeks, lots of subscribers, lots of comments, and I do really try to go through the comments and reply to everyone. If you ask me where I get the cable 3 times, I will answer you 3 times usually. So I do appreciate that. It's always nice to know that someone else is out there. So today we are looking at the Senfer DT6. So I wanted to get this out before 11/11 because this guy is going to be $18 or so, $17, $18 on 11/11. It's on a lot of people's 11/11 list. I already have it, obviously, so I am going to probably buy the DT6 Pro on 11/11, which is not $18. I think it's more like $29. Kind of a gamble at this point because no one has it, but I might throw it a dice based on how much I like the DT6. We'll probably just go for the Pro. So what's cool about the DT6? It is a 12mm dynamic driver, 1 balanced armature, and 1 7mm piezoelectric driver. So it's a tribrid, or it's a hybrid with 3 different components, however you want to call it. And that's dynamic drive on the low end, the balanced armature for the mids and uppers, and the piezoelectric, they say, is for the very high end. The very high end pitch, I think, is what they call it. So another unique thing about these guys is the metal had a special name, which I forgot, but these are metal shells. They are kind of heavy if you're used to plastic shells with like a little metal faceplate. They are MMCX connectors. This happens to be a TRN T2 cable, but I would definitely not go out and buy a cable just for these guys. The regular cable's fine. I was just ordering it from AliExpress, and I'm like, well, I need another extra cable, so I'll just buy the cable at the same time. But yeah, please don't assume that if you're going to go buy a DT6, you're going to need a cable, because you don't. The stock cable is actually, this is the microphone version. So probably a 4-core black plastic, and I think I just bought the TRN version just so it matches and looks the same and all that jazz. Another unique thing about it, if you see the pictures of it in the ad, it comes with these almost ridged earpieces, which didn't work for me at all, but perhaps if your ears are a little smaller, they might work for you. I went with the KZ. These are just the KZ star tips, and that worked for me, so I stuck with that. So before we get into some music, let's go through a couple charts that I ran across on the internet. So the first thing to know about the DT6 is it's kind of divisive. Guys, Critical was one of them, absolutely hated it. He hated the DT6 with a passion, apparently, and this is what his graph looked like. These were some other guys who actually liked it a whole lot more, and their graph is a little different. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say which one is right and which one is wrong, but Critical obviously had some treble that went way above the bass. These guys have a more gentle sloping down, and since they annotated it, I will kind of walk through real quickly what they did since they took the time to talk about it. I will too. So yeah, so the bass on this guy is really good. It was great compared to the DB3, which I just got done with. This thing's got a big 12mm dynamic driver, and it feels like a 12mm dynamic driver. So that kind of was great. Slight bass bleed. Yeah, maybe. I like it. If that bothers you, then the overall bass and then that is probably going to really bother you. So vocals, not distant. The truth is they're not distant and not forward. They're pretty neutral, kind of where it was mastered. So that's a little different. If you want vocal forward, not so much for you. No harshness and hardness. Brightness was kind of there. No sibilance. And the sparkle and air and fake resolution, I'm not sure that really comes through a whole lot. But so all this was really supposed to be the piezoelectric. I mean, all these really high frequencies should have been there in that piezoelectric. And so it's hard to say whether that's really happening. But on the sparkle side, maybe more on the voices, and we'll get to that in a minute. So let's kind of go through the good and the bad, a little bit of the ugly on this guy. So first, the bass. That's kind of the first thing that you'll really hear on this guy. It's got plenty of it, and it doesn't so much go, and you actually see it in the chart, but the sub bass isn't huge for a 12 millimeter driver, but the bass itself is actually there's a really nice quantity of bass, and it goes deep, and it's rich, and it's textured, and all that stuff that you want in a big dynamic driver, it's all there. And so that was great, especially after the DB3, which kind of drove me nuts. DT6, if you don't like a lot of bass, again, this one isn't for you. And so going back to that divisive topic, it really comes down to the timbre, the natural instruments. So this guy, if you're into electronic music, it's super good. If you're into, you want to hear, the most natural piano or violin or guitar, this guy is not for you. Too much color, too much perfume, whatever you want to call it. It's got a sound signature and a tuning that does things to natural instruments, which most people seem to absolutely hate. For me, I didn't hate it, especially even on instruments, pianos and guitars. But if that's your music taste, where you really want to hear natural instruments in their natural state, natural quality and sound, this guy will, drive you nuts. I don't know. That's it never really got to the point where it drove me nuts, even on those things. But if you read a lot of the hate on the reviews, that's pretty much what it came down to. And it'll come down to which music do you like, either electronic or natural instruments. And natural instruments people shouldn't have bought the DT6, even though I think that's what Senfer was known for, kind of this bright sound signature, and it was probably more suited towards that music in the past. But the DT6 is definitely something different. So along those lines, on the bass side, so I said lots of bass, lots of good bass. So Beyonce's Sweet Dreams, Queen Bee. Sweet Dreams is one of her popular songs. So right in the beginning, there's this super groovy bass line. Really groovy on this guy. And then you hear, Queen Bee start singing, right? And her voice is kind of high, and it's super clear. Like this guy, the vocals, maybe we'll get to it in a minute, but the vocals are sort of crystal clear, not the most detailed. If you're looking for Adele's voice to reverberate 10 times, that's not these guys. I called it crisp. That was the first thing that kind of came to my mind. It's not clipped, but the vocals, they're not even, crisp is kind of a weird word too, but they're not sharp, but kind of it's crisp in a clarity way, where I think it's that sparkle bit. I think there's a little sparkle on the vocals, a little shine to them that makes them stand out. And they're not bright, but they stand out and pop. So you get Beyonce's voice, and then you get the bass, which is really low, and then her voice has this little sparkle to it, and it's a great contrast. It sort of wrapped up everything that I liked in these pair, in that song. Really cool. When you hear the two going at the same time, you're like, wow, this is cool. So Madonna's Medellin, kind of same thing. That's probably, if you want to hear like the pure, how deep and rich this thing can go, that's about as far as I will push it on this guy. And the bass line on that goes, when the percussion starts, it's pretty deep. So this guy handles it really well. Interesting song. Because again, her voice is kind of iconic. And when you hear her talk in the beginning, and then the guy talks. You get that vocal quality, which is just super on this guy. London Grammar's Hey Now, one of my favorite songs, but not so good on this. The bass kind of goes out of control. So while I love the bass and it goes deep and rich and all that stuff, it's definitely not as well controlled as other IMs. And what do you get for $18? You get something that might spin out of control on you. So the bass goes from okay, then it goes a little deeper, and then it gets all mushy, and it just loses all of its shape. And I don't know why it happened on that song, because her voice is... I picked it because of her voice, not so much. I didn't even realize that it went that low, but it does, and I was like, whoa, that's not good. So that one popped out as me as, yes, good bass, but not as, maybe a little loose and not as in control as it should be. But 12 millimeters, it's big. So on the voice side, I picked Eminem's Walk on Water because it matches with Beyonce. She does the vocals in that as well. But so his delivery sort of matches what I said. It's that crisp delivery. He's got that staccato, hard edge to his lyrics and his voice. And when he's singing and rapping, he enunciates every word, but it's super clear, super sharp. And that was what sort of reminded me of the vocals here. Is this is not Adele or open airy vocals and reverberations and all that. But if you want to hear Eminem, sharp vocals, hear him breathing, it does that really well. And so that one kind of just hit me as like, yes, that's the match to this guy. It's not Drake and his kind of relaxed delivery. This is kind of sharp and hard, and it matches really well with how this does vocals. So that was why I picked that one. But literally, vocals, male and female, they're all really good on this. It's definitely tuned just for that. And again, that's probably why people sort of either love it or hate it. It's depending on what music you like. If it doesn't have a whole lot of vocals, if you're just pure classical music with no vocals, then and your instruments are getting colored in a way that's not so pleasing to you, then yeah, I 100% understand why people hated it, depending on what their music was like. So soundstage is another interesting point at $18, because that was the downfall of the ZSN, had kind of a small soundstage. The KB06 was much better. I think even the DB3 was better. So it was nice to have a bunch of kind of under $30 IMs that had a really nice soundstage, and this is another one. And the imaging and the soundstage are really good on this guy. So Lady Gaga Shallow, the way it starts off, right? You get Bradley Cooper's vocals, and he's got a guitar going. And again, the guitar doesn't really bother me. It sounded kind of as it should, but his voice sounds as it should, really good. And then she starts singing, and then again, her vocals sound great. And then she sings for a little bit, and then the piano kicks in. And all of a sudden, I sort of realized that the piano is basically in front of her voice. It's like almost as if you were standing there and she is singing like at the piano, but the piano's still between you and her. And it was like freaky. I don't know if they really mastered that was the intention, but that's what comes through. And the depth on this guy is probably more apparent than the width. And width-wise, it's actually really good, but it was just weird hearing that song in that way as soon as the piano kicked in, and you're like, oh, her vocals are actually presented slightly back, and it goes back to that chart, right? The vocals aren't recessed, but they're not forward. They're sort of where they should be, neutral. But then you hear this piano, which sounds almost right in front of her vocals, not, crushing her vocals or anything, but it's just location-wise, that's the way it sounds, and super cool. And so this Naughty Boy song, La 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 by Naughty Boy, does the same exact thing. The very opening of the song, it's this open space. There's sort of sound kind of floating out in this bigger soundstage room-ish. And then the first time you hear the hook, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's the hook, and it's sort of right in the middle. Sounds right. But Sam Smith does the vocals, and the minute you hear Sam Smith start doing his vocals, you realize that he's in front of all of that. And you get a really nice sense of depth, as these things started way back, and then the first hook, and then there's Sam Smith, and you're like, oh, that's very cool. So those two kind of blew me away just on the soundstage. So not much else to say on this guy. This one made me happy, like super happy. 12mm dynamic driver, lots of bass, lots of great pop music, dance music, all those things that are bass driven, electronic. See, acoustic didn't bother me so much, but I'm not going to say go buy for that, because obviously people hated it for that. But if you lie on that more electronic instrumentation, beat driven music, check it out, especially at $18. It's a pretty good bargain, and probably right now my favorite at that price point. The ZSN I would probably refer to more people because it covers a wider range of genres. It's sort of non-offensive to anyone, whereas this, half the people are going to hate it, half will love it. It's hard to recommend that without really knowing who you're going to recommend it to, but for me personally, it probably took my favorite. It's definitely my favorite under 20. So look it up for 1111. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all the comments and subscriptions and all that junk. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.